Hey everybody, welcome back to another YouTube tutorial. My name's Insert Name here, and it's been a long time, I know. I've been busy with a few projects recently, and had a bit of work to do, and I still have quite a bit of work to do currently, but we're slowly but surely gonna start and ramp up the production of the videos. Starting off with this landscape tutorial series. Now for this landscape tutorial series, we'll be creating landscapes using weight maps. We'll talk about macro texture variation to help vary the tiling. We're going to be talking about virtual texturing to just kind of blend in objects in between. There's quite a lot to talk about, and I can't really wait to continue with this tutorial series. The great part of this tutorial series is that I will be releasing an episode about every second to third day, maybe sometimes even the fourth day. I have filmed a few already that I can just go ahead and post every second day, which is really cool. And yeah, can't wait for it. So without further ado, let's get into the tutorial series. So here I'm on the desktop. I have a folder called UE Terrain Export. You can have any folder, which you can name anything you want, but this is the folder where all my height maps and weight maps is gonna be in. So now we're just gonna go ahead and start up TerreSculptor. I have a darker theme on, so don't worry about the theme. The theme's not going to change how the interface completely looks. So the interface is still going to have the buttons at the same place. So when you boot up TerreSculptor, it's going to bring up this window, welcome to TerreSculptor. You can create a new project, open terrain, and import terrain. We're just going to go ahead and create a new project. Now here, it might seem tempting to type a terrain size to the power of 2, because usually in Unreal Engine your textures should be in the power of 2, but if I actually alt-tab to my browser, I actually have the landscape technical guide documents open in my browser, and this is written by Epic, by the way, so it's a good idea to follow these. And here's the recommended landscape sizes. And one thing you'll instantly notice is none of these are to the power of 2. Now that's why it's a good idea to rather follow these resolutions and use one of these recommended resolutions. If you use a texture to the power of 2, you can end up with a few problems. One of the bigger ones being culling might not work perfectly, so you're going to lose quite a lot of performance. And the other one is you might have stretching at the edges. So it's really not good to go ahead and use a power 2. So I'm just going to use the recommended 2017 by 2017. You could use 8129 by 8129 if you want. I just don't want to, for the sake of this tutorial, use a bigger size so everything loads quicker. So I'm going to use 2017 by 2017. So I can go to TerreSculptor, width 2017, length 2017. I have the webpage linked down below if you want to check over what the technical resolutions are that you should be using. Fill value doesn't matter because the noise map we're going to generate is actually going to override that anyway. So you can just go ahead and click OK. And now we have a flat landscape ready to go. You can use your scroll wheel to scroll out and in of the terrain. And you can also use your left mouse button to drag around your camera and look at different points. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go to the top left and go to noise map. Now there's multiple noise maps you can use, and I'm gonna be using Perlin, but I'm gonna show you, for example, Voronoi. If I click on that, it doesn't make a lot of sense to use this. In fact, this is where we use to calculate glass breaking in Unreal Engine. It's like how we calculate damage, one of the ways we do it. But if you go to presets and you click on big dunes, then suddenly this Voronoi texture looks like it has way more use than it ever did. And that's the thing, right? If I go to noise map, all of these have their own uses. So below, if I click on the preset, has island, and there, now it has a use suddenly. And what I would recommend is you go through all the noise maps, look at which one fits your usage, and just go with that. But for my case, I want to use Perlin because I really like the landscape it generates. I'll also go to my browser and look at the reference. I'll have a link down to the manual which explains each and every generator's settings. But I'm going to be explaining Perlin's one because I'm using that right now. So presets, I'm just gonna go with the default preset. I really like how it looks by default. And I'm gonna start off with the size. Now, the size isn't in the manual, but it's actually pretty self-explanatory. This is the size of the texture being used to kind of generate where the details are. So if I up this, then there's mountains in the middle because everything just scaled down. And if I make this less, then everything is scaled up. Or scaled down. It's really weird to explain. But this is more zoomed in. And this is, well, very zoomed out. That's the best way to explain it, really. Usually I like something between continent and mountain, leaning a bit more towards continent. So I really like 300 and the area there. Height field. Layout is just really moving the texture around to find something that you really like. I really like 0 because I like the mountains at the edges and with this big flatter part in the middle. Detail is practically, well, the scaling up of the detail. So if I put this on 1, then you can see, oh wow, there isn't much detail. But if I scale this up, wow, there's way more detail. Now you should be careful. Even if you're gonna bake this out to a texture and the detail doesn't matter, it's not gonna affect performance. It's good to note that detail and roughness work interchangeably or work with each other. So if I bump up the roughness, then suddenly this terrain looks a bit harsh. There's a lot of holes in it, and that's what the detail solves. This practically limits... The details practically limits what the roughness can do. The roughness will bump up the details gain, and the detail, of course, you should adjust so there isn't too many holes. So you can just go ahead, lower the roughness a bit. I like my detail at something like 7. And I want to keep it fairly rough, but not too rough. Something that's like this looks pretty good because there isn't too many holes. But of course we can adjust this as we get into the density and gain. Shape is really important. This practically tells the program which type of fall-off you want to use. And there really is a lot of shapes. In fact, there's 19. And you can play around to find which one you like. But currently, I really am a fan of 1 and 2. In fact, I'm gonna go ahead and use 1. Density, of course, just scales practically the density of the map. But as you can see, it's a bit different from the continent because it still has an idea of where mountains should be. So even if I adjust the density around, it still wants to put the mountains at certain parts. So you can really adjust this so that there aren't too many holes, but you still have a lot of detail. And then gain. Well, it's practically just scaling something along the z-axis. So if I really adjust this up, you can see, well, yeah, it's just scaled it. So here we can already see that our detail and roughness is a bit working against us. So we want to lower the roughness to make it less bumpier. See if we can play around. I think we can up the density a bit. And then we can go ahead and push the gain up again. Now, important thing to note is if you push the gain up too much, you're going to see this red bar. And what this means is there's cutoff up the top or the bottom of your height field. So, if I push up the gain severely, you're going to see the cutoff happening, in fact. And that's because, well, height field can only store so much height detail. And you're practically going over the amount of detail it can store. So you just want to go ahead and lower the gain until it fits. But as you can see here, we barely have any space at the top, but we have a lot more space to work with at the bottom, and that's what the offset is for. You can move around your landscape on the Z-axis so that you can kind of center it, and then you can up the gain if you want to utilize more of your landscape. So something like this looks pretty cool. I think I'm gonna lower the density. Actually, no, I think I'm gonna up the density a bit, but lower the roughness. Something like this looks pretty good. Then I'm gonna go ahead and offset it a bit down so I can push up the gain a bit more. And yeah, I think I'm gonna push it a bit more and try to fit it in. Yeah, something like this is pretty good. It takes up 97.5% of our landscape. So yeah, and I'm really stoked about how this landscape actually looks. Of course, you can play around with these settings to find something you like more, but I'm really a big fan of how this looks. In fact, I think I'm gonna go ahead and set the gain to 185. Actually, I think we can fit in 6. Oh no, we can only fit in 5. And yeah, I'm really happy with how this turned out. You can also enable warp, which you can just adjust the frequency and gain. And it could produce good results, but if you play around too much with it, it can kind of ruin your landscape. Just use it sparingly. Gain is fine to play with. Don't want to play too much with the frequency. I'll keep the frequency pretty low. Something like this looks pretty cool, but I'm gonna not use warp in this case. Yeah, that's pretty good for now, actually. You can also randomize the seed that's being used for your landscape, so you can discover multiple landscapes. It's important to note that if you're doing this, sometimes you will go over the bar, and you have to adjust your gain and offset accordingly for which seed you're using. I'm a huge fan of how 0 looks, so I'm gonna press 0 and enter. And this is my landscape. It looks pretty barren, but I'm really digging how it looks. And of course, you can add more mountains with the scaler if you want. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and do some erosion. Now, if you might have noticed while looking at mountains, they have these cracks in them, kind of like at the upper part, and this is caused by rain, just over time destroying the mountain down and adding these cracks. So you can just go to the top left, go to erosion, and there is a hydraulic erosion, which is really realistic to use it. And in fact, I will link a manual page down below to describe it better, but I'm not really a big fan of it. I usually like the more, how can I say, more, this, it's kind of like adding more dramatic emphasis to the landscape with rain, and that's what I really like. It's important to note that you might notice we're using a limited amount of the landscape for the preview. It's because rain erosion, and any erosion for the fact, is a one-frame operation, and also it is really intensive. So we don't even have a preview yet. We should go ahead and click the preview button, and now we finally have a preview. And that's the thing to note, right? We're gonna sit a while here, and we don't have much to work with, but this is still enough because we have a bit of a mountainy part. So we can just play around with the rain amount. You can play around with the rest, but usually I find the rain amount works pretty well to play with. So I'm gonna try a half rain amount. And yeah, I'm really digging the half. Let's try an auto, and let's see how that looks. Auto generates pretty good results, actually, I'd say. I'm gonna try half again and check how that looks. Then I'm gonna go ahead and try a quarter. Yeah, I'm a fan of how half looks, really. It's that point where it's not too much. It's that point in the middle where I really like it. I'm really a huge fan of it. Of course, like I said, you can play around with the other settings, maybe changing the day position rate. Yeah. Just push that a bit up. And yeah, you can play around with this. In fact, I actually kind of like that. But I'm just gonna go ahead, reset, and set my rain amount to half. and preview. And yeah, that looks pretty good. Gonna hit OK. And because it's a one-thread operation, if you have a single-threaded CPU, not a single-threaded CPU, but if you have strong single-thread performance, then this is gonna go pretty quickly for you. So Ryzen 9s, they don't really have a fun time, but we're gonna ignore that. Yeah, and that's our terrain now. That's really good looking. I'm really a fan of how it looks. And in fact, I'm so glad, I'm so happy about it. I'm just gonna save this landscape. So what I want to do is I want to click File, Export Terrain. And this is where our UE Terrain export folder comes in. On my desktop, I made a folder UE Terrain Export. What you want to do is on the file name, next to file name, you'll see this Autodesk 3D Studio Mesh. You just want to click on that and change the export type to PNG image, not PNG old codec or RGB16. You just want PNG image. The file name will be T underscore. We can name it T underscore because it's a texture, and that's just something I learned in Unreal Engine. It's kind of stuck in your head sometimes. And I'm just gonna call this T underscore terrain. You can just save that. It's gonna ask you what format and source. It's important to put this on 16-bit grayscale. If you have it on 8-bit grayscale, then your landscape may look a bit blocky in Unreal Engine. So it's better to use 16-bit grayscale. Not higher, only 16-bit grayscale. Source, grayscale. Just go ahead and OK. And there, we saved the landscape. Something you can also do is you can click File, Save Project. And you can also save your project in that folder. It's going to save as a TerreSculptor world, so .ts world. We'll just call this our terrain ts for TerreSculptor. I'll just save that. Now if I minimize all these, click on the UE Terrain Export, then you'll see both of them ready to go. So if you ever want to re-import your landscape, you can just go ahead. I'll save the project. Yeah, of course, save the same one, override it, and exit the application. Then you can just open up TerreSculptor, and we'll just give this a short while to go. Just doing a twin, okay. Now when this pop-up comes in, you can import terrain or open project. Import terrain means you'll just go ahead and open the terrain height map, but you can also do open project and just open your terrain ts.world, and there is our terrain. If you have a bigger terrain, of course you can add more mountains if you want. It's really dependent on what you want. I want this Healy type effect currently, so I'm gonna go for that. And I can just go ahead. And like I said, just save. We already saved everything. We're ready to go. So if you like the so good night, everybody. So that's it for this video, everybody. Thanks for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. Hit like if you liked the video. Hit dislike if you didn't. If you hit dislike, please tell me why. I'm really wanting to improve my content, and I'm really curious as to what your thoughts would be to improve our landscape. I read the comments commonly. It's just for the last 2 weeks I've been on a bit of a working frenzy, but I'm glad to be back now. And after these videos release, I'm definitely going to be eyeing the comment section, looking at ways to improve our landscape over the episodes. So please give me your input. And good night, everybody.